Hey there, friend. Welcome to Headstrong Coaching. My name is Dr. Randy Arno, and I'm here to bring you science-backed strategies to help you create more focus, more motivation, and more passion for achieving your most important life goals. Now, David Goggins, a Navy SEAL and combat veteran, once said, "Have the courage to be who you are, not what others expect you to be." In this video, I'm going to explain to you the real meaning of courage, and I'm also going to give you a couple of tips on how to develop more courage in your life. Now, think about what courage means to you, and think about something that you have done that was courageous to you. I'll give you an example from my own life. I can think back on the very first time I gave an oral presentation at a professional conference. Now, not only was this a professional conference and I was still a graduate student, but it was a conference focused on advanced statistical methods. So, needless to say, I was terrified. I was completely terrified of giving this presentation. I had a lot of thoughts going through my mind. Who the hell was I to be talking to an audience about how to do statistics? What if I get it wrong? What if somebody asks me a question I can't answer? What if the audience already knows how to use this technique that I'm talking about? Are people really going to learn something from me? Basically, I had a lot of thoughts of what the hell am I doing here? When it came time for the presentation, I was super nervous, anxious. I really felt like my voice was shaking, my body was shaking. I felt like I couldn't catch my breath at times. There were multiple times I was really worried I was just going to completely lose my train of thought because I was so focused on whether people were judging me, and also whether I even looked anxious. I was anxious about being anxious. So here's the key point here. I did it anyway, and I got through it. And can you guess what the result was? The result was, afterwards, besides the initial relief, I felt my self-confidence had improved. And the next time I gave an oral presentation at a conference, I was still pretty nervous, but nowhere near as anxious as that first time. I did it despite the fear, and the fear diminished. And the next time I did it, the fear diminished even more, and so on and so on. I think you get the message. So here's a key point. Doing something that you fear not only decreases the fear, but it also makes you more confident in yourself and your ability to figure things out. So there are really three types of courage. The one we usually hear about, read about in the news, is what we call physical courage, when somebody's acting despite physical dangers. This is like somebody jumps and pushes somebody out of the way of a moving train, somebody that runs into a burning building to save someone. That's physical courage. There are other types of courage that are actually a lot more common than physical courage, but we don't hear about as much. One is moral courage. Moral courage is doing what is right despite social opposition, despite lots of people disagreeing with you. Now, the one I want to focus on most here today is what we call psychological courage. Psychological courage is when someone is facing some sort of psychological discomfort or psychological risk to pursue some sort of meaningful goal. Now, Brene Brown likes to refer to this type of courage as everyday courage, because this is the courage that probably we see most frequently, but again, we don't really hear much about it. And when I asked, earlier, what are some things you've done that are courageous, I could give a lot of other things that I've done that are courageous that will probably not sound very courageous to you. But they were for me, at least the first time I did them. The very first time I took a yoga class, that was to me an act of courage. I felt extremely vulnerable. I was actually quite athletic at the time, but it was something that I had not done before, and there was a big class with lots of people in there, and I was sitting at the front of the room because I wanted to make sure I could follow the instructor because I'd never ever done it before. And so I had, again, thoughts about what are people going to think about me? What if I screw up? So I want to talk a little bit about the definition of courage according to Brene Brown. Now, Brene Brown is a researcher and also now a motivational speaker. She's written a lot of really good books, has some really good, couple really good TED Talks. If you're not familiar with her, I highly recommend you check her out. But let me tell you what her definition of courage is. Well, first of all, I'm going to tell you a little bit of information about the word courage that I learned from Brene Brown. And this is a direct quote from one of her videos. She tells us, courage is a heart word. The root of the word courage is cor. That's the Latin word for heart. So in one of its earliest forms, the word courage actually meant to speak one's mind by telling all of one's heart. And Brene Brown goes on to tell us, over time this definition has changed, and today we typically associate courage with heroic and brave deeds. But in my opinion, and this is still Brene Brown talking, this definition fails to recognize the inner strength and level of commitment required for us to actually speak honestly and openly about who we are and about our experiences, both good and bad. So this, again, ties back to the original quote from David Goggins, where he said, have the courage to be yourself, who you actually are. And it actually does take a lot of courage to be yourself. It's something that we refer to as authenticity, where you are always completely and openly yourself. And that takes a lot of courage. Now, why does it take a lot of courage? It's because it makes us feel vulnerable. So when we really express ourselves, we take an emotional risk. It's a vulnerability, and Brene Brown has a good definition of vulnerability. She defines it as an emotional risk, exposure, or uncertainty. Now, Brene Brown says, allowing yourself to be vulnerable helps build courage, because when we allow people to know who we really are, that's when we get really anxious about, is this person going to still accept me? Am I still going to be, am I going to be rejected by this person? Am I going to be ridiculed? That's the core of what vulnerability is. But as Brene Brown says, vulnerability is our most accurate measure of courage. So what she recommends, and there's good research on this as well, is allow yourself to be vulnerable. And you're starting to feel vulnerable when you start to get that kind of icky feeling like, ooh, I feel anxious here. Should I change the subject? Usually when we feel vulnerable, we try to avoid the situation or get out of the situation or change the subject. Brene Brown suggests leaning into vulnerability, continuing to express your true self despite feeling vulnerable. And this really taps into my next point in this video, a couple of tips on how to be more courageous. Now, a few years ago when I took it's kind of a personality measure, it's called the VIA Inventory of Strengths, one of my bottom strengths was courage, and that really fit for me. And so this is something that I've been working on for quite a while now. And the best way to develop courage is to do acts of courage. Courage is doing things anyway despite the fear. It's not the absence of fear. That's a common misperception. You cannot get rid of fear completely. Doing something despite the fear is courage. Well, I misspoke. You can get rid of fears. The fear is an emotion that is adaptive, but oftentimes when we're doing something that puts us in a vulnerable position, or something we've never done before, we experience that fear. So tip number one is to practice acts of courage. And basically, I'm saying if there's something important to you to do or a difficult conversation to have with someone, do it anyway despite the fear. Now, that can be easier said than done, because when we do things that make ourselves vulnerable and anxious and fearful, those negative emotions are very powerful, and their first, thought in our brain is, danger, get away. So how do we deal with strong negative emotions so that we can do things anyway despite the fear? So there's a really good technique. It's kind of a mindfulness technique, and it's called the stop technique. So stop, S-T-O-P. S is for stop for a moment. Don't react. Give yourself the gift of a brief reflection. So as soon as you start feeling that fear or anxiety about something you're going to say or something you're going to do that is important, or perhaps a topic comes up and it's a difficult conversation, your first reaction is to avoid. Stop for just a moment. Don't react. Reflect. The T is for take a breath. Take a deep breath in and out. And just try to focus on the breath. Just focus on how the breath feels. Then the O is observe your experience. Notice your bodily sensations. Notice the thoughts in your head and the story that's going through your mind. Oftentimes with negative emotions, we have a lot of negative thoughts and sort of negative stories that we tell ourselves. So tune into your bodily sensations, your thoughts, your emotions, and just remind yourself that thoughts are not facts, and that emotions actually come and go. So even though you're experiencing a strong negative emotion right now, it's not going to last forever, and you can get through it. So the P is then proceed. You've stopped for a moment, not reacted, reflected, taken a breath, focused on your breath, tuned in to your experience, your physical sensations and your thoughts, so you can kind of tell yourself, okay, I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling fearful, but these negative thoughts I'm having are not facts, and I can get through this negative emotion because they're just emotions, and emotions come and go. And then proceed. Then move forward in a way that you feel is right for you and consistent with your values. It's still going to be difficult, but the stop technique can sort of give you a little bit of a perspective and a step back to give you that moment to realize you're about to react and, change a subject or escape or avoid, instead of doing something that you really want to do, but you're just afraid of doing it. And like I said, the key thing to remember is do it anyway. That's the best way to build courage, is to do things that frighten you. And you'll find usually they're not quite as bad as you had thought they'd be. And the main thing is, the more you do things that frighten you or that make you anxious, the less anxious and fearful you'll be the next time. So I hope this was helpful for you. Do me a favor and share this video with someone that you believe might find it useful. Tag somebody in this video. If you have some thoughts or comments, please share them below. And if you have any questions, just type them in the comments, and I will definitely follow up with you. So that is it for now. Thanks for tuning in, and I will see you all next time.